If you're looking for a perfect everyday bag that is light, durable, versatile, and hip for this summer, don't miss out on the newest addition to the Knack family of products, the Knack Sling Bag. It looks and feels great, whether at work or at the beach on a hot summer day.
Check out the link in the description to order yours with free shipping on all orders. Thanks to our friends at Knack for sponsoring this episode. If you get a Knack bag, don't forget to post it on social media and tag us at GameOnETB. We want to see you enjoying your Knack bag.
This is Game On, discussing the biggest games and all the latest sports news with Johnny Montalbano and Hank Indictor on the Empty the Bench Podcast Network.
Showtime, folks. It's episode 15 of Game On, presented by Knack, here on the Empty the Bench Podcast Network. Johnny Montalbano, Hank Indictor with you as always. Hank, welcome. How are you?
I'm doing pretty well. How about yourself?
I'm doing great. You know, I can't believe already we're at episode 15. You know, I keep saying this every show, but it comes quick. And, you know, it's already starting to get to late June. You know, I saw a stat over the weekend. We're like 10 Saturdays away from college football, so I'm excited. And, you know, we have another jam-packed show, as we always do, and a couple of different ways we're going to go about the show this week. So I'm looking forward to discussing with you. And folks, of course, several ways you can get aboard. You can follow us on our social media platforms. We're on Facebook at facebook.com/GameOnETB. We're on Twitter at GameOnETB. We're on Instagram at GameOn_ETB. And also our personal handles are scrolling right there on the bottom part of your screen. And we're also Empty the Bench. The podcast network is on TikTok. So check that out as well. And of course, subscribe to our YouTube channel. So plenty of ways to listen, interact, all that good stuff here on the show. And we have a lot to get to, as we always do. We're going to get to, you know, we got some hockey to discuss because one of our former Ranger head coaches took a job with the Philadelphia Flyers. We will get into that. We've got Deshaun Watson. It wouldn't be another week without talking about Deshaun Watson. We'll get to that. It wouldn't be another week if we wouldn't talk about good old Rob Manfred. We'll tell you why he is in the news again this week. And believe it or not, we have some wrestling talk. Yes, the WWE had some news this past week with their chairman, Vince McMahon. And we will have Tom Albano, who you know from Empty the Bench and also from Fansided and host of the new MMA podcast coming to the Empty the Bench podcast network called the MMA Outsiders, which debuts on July 27th. He's going to come on in just a little while to discuss the whole WWE stuff with Vince McMahon and what's going to transpire and what he thinks is going to transpire there. So a lot to get to, but Hank, we have to get things going here with the NBA, of course, and we've got two different NBA stories we're going to talk about. And number one here, obviously the NBA Finals, which concluded on Thursday as the Golden State Warriors defeated the Boston Celtics in Game 6 and won another NBA championship, which is just amazing when you think about it. Because when I look back at this series and I look at, you know, we'll look at this and then I look at the Warriors as a whole here because there's some ways to look at it with that. But I look at this game and this series and it's something we've discussed before, you know, star players. And we were talking about Steph Curry on episode 14, how the Warriors were able to win in spite of him in Game 5 and how we felt like he was going to have kind of a breakout, big bounce back sort of game in Game 6. And it seems like, you know, in the NBA playoffs and in the finals, it comes down to your star players. It comes down to your bench players and your defense. And that's three of, if not the three biggest reasons why the Warriors were able to win this championship.
Yeah, for sure. And, you know, looking at this championship, this was a special accomplishment by a team that really had such a great run. Fourth championship for Steph Curry. And, you know, look, don't get me wrong. I generally don't like the whole list debates or about where a player goes in a pyramid, like a la Bill Simmons, just because, like, I feel like it kind of devalues what so many of the other great players did. However, if I had to make a list of top 10 players, I think at this point you have to put Steph Curry in there for a few reasons. Because number one, he pretty much revolutionized the game of basketball with his three-point shooting. And number two, he did something that Larry Bird, Magic Johnson, Shaquille O'Neal, Bill Russell, who am I leaving? Michael Jordan, and Kobe Bryant have done. And I'm sure there's and Tim Duncan, sorry. They have won 4 championships and have won at least one regular season MVP and a finals MVP. That is pretty dang special. And I don't care what you say about the 17 and 18 Warriors teams that, he won. He won those because Kevin Durant joined those teams. If you don't remember, the team before that won 73 games and probably should have won back-to-back finals, although you could also argue that the 2015 Cavs should have won that finals had Kevin Love and Kyrie Irving been healthy that year. But regardless, another thing I want you to think about, every single year that Klay Thompson, Steph Curry, and Draymond Green have all been together in the starting lineup, the Warriors have at least made it to the NBA Finals. That is pretty damn impressive. And I don't care if they've lost like a few times in a row. Steph Curry is definitely an all-time great. And I think you have to pretty much put Klay Thompson and Draymond Green in that same breath. I mean, all of them are going to be Hall of Famers. And of course, you have Steve Kerr winning his 4th title as a coach. That's now 9 rings altogether, including 3 with the Bulls and 2 with the Spurs. So amazing. That's a lot of legacies right there.
Think about it. Steve Kerr has won 33% of the last 27 NBA Finals.
That's right.
As a player and as a coach.
And you want to know who has the highest winning percentage in playoff series? Steve Kerr.
Yeah. You brought up some interesting things there. As far as Steph Curry as an all-time great, I think I think that's a discussion for the end of his career.
Mm-hmm.
But the one thing I would say with Curry is I think he is if not the most influential players in league history, because he has changed this game so much. There are 2 things that have changed in the NBA, and he's a big part of one of them, and that's the three-point shot. Because now you see these guys, they go down the court. You see these teams now, they're going down the court and hoisting up threes.
Yeah.
You never really saw that before. Just going back to the Jordan era, the Jordan era teams would go down and take the shot clock, look for the perfect shot, and, force you to play top-notch defense. Where you look at Curry, and not only and Curry's teams, it's not even just the maybe not even lack of defense or the quick shot. It's just the scoring in general. These shooters now in this day and age are so much better, and it started with him. Coming out of Davidson, we saw what he did in that NCAA tournament with him, and how it's been able to transfer over into the NBA. So while I'm not ready to put him on a list yet of all-time greats, and he's going to be up there. I mean, he could retire tomorrow, and he would be up there. But I would say that he's probably the most influential player in league history. I'd say even more so than LeBron, and among others, because just look at the way the game has changed and how successful it's been for him, with the three-point shot, with the way that he's been able to play. And the other thing you brought up too, which can't go unnoticed, is not only Curry, but Klay Thompson, which is probably the best story of this whole entire post championship, is the fact that Klay Thompson was able to rebound off those 2 major injuries where he missed 2 full seasons and get back to in the playoffs being the Klay Thompson of old. Because he was a little rusty there when he came back this past year in the season, but the way he's able to rebound in the playoffs and look like he was the Klay Thompson of old, remarkable. Great story. I mean, he's a very likable guy. He's tremendous. He's another one of those big 3-point shooters that, really started with Curry, but he also had that too. And Draymond Green. These are trios. That's part of the reason why we're talking about a dynasty here with the Warriors, almost very similar to the Bulls, because, they had a three-peat And then they had 2 years when Jordan left to go play baseball. The 2 years that he was out, they didn't do it. And then they had another three-peat. Now, obviously, it's not a three-peat with the Warriors, but just the success that they've had has been very similar in that regard, like with the Bulls. So the trios that they've had, and you think about, and you brought this up, the greatest trios in NBA history now. You have Curry, Thompson, and Green. You've got Duncan, Ginobili, and Parker with the Spurs. Those three won 4. The Spur players won 4. Jordan, Pippen, and Rodman won 3. Magic, Kareem, and Worthy 3. Bird, McHale, Parrish, Isaiah Thomas, Dumars, Lambier, and LeBron, Wade, and Bosh. So Steph, Clay, and Dre have won 4, which goes along with the Spur guys and the Bull players. So that's how you get multiple championships, not only in the NBA but in sports, is when you start with a core group of players, and then you build in your role players around that. And Steve Kerr, his job as the head coach has been tremendous, and just you look at these role players that have contributed. Jordan Poole had a great run. Gary Payton had a great postseason. Kevin Looney was there. Otto Porter. Really, you can go down the list here, and even the veteran presence of Andre Iguodala on the team. So and Andrew Wiggins. There's another one. We spoke about him earlier on in this NBA Finals. So really, it was not only just those big 3 players, those trio, but it's also like the Wiggins who steps up when Curry had an off game earlier in the series, and it's Jordan Poole who made multiple big shots throughout the postseason. So that's how you get it done, and that's how they did. And like I had mentioned on the show last week, the Warriors were a team that I think could have survived an off night from one of their star players, and the Celtics could not. They could not get over the fact that, Jaylen Brown was inconsistent, that Jason Tatum just seemed to fall apart. It looked like the Celtics got tired at the end. And yeah, they jumped out in game 6 to a nice lead, and you thought they were going to, keep it going, but the Warriors bounced back. They had a 21-0 run in game 6, and it looked like they just took off from there and never looked back. And while the Celtics did make a little bit of a run there in the third quarter, the Warriors are just too good and too talented.
Yeah, there really was never a doubt in my mind that the Warriors were going to win that game. And look, as far as the Celtics, you got to tip your cap to them, because they had by far the more difficult path of the two teams in the NBA playoffs. Because starting with the first round, even though that was obviously a sweep, it took a really good shot by Jason Tatum, thanks to a Marcus Smart pass that probably would not have happened a year ago, I might add. And that pretty much was the catalyst in their sweep of a Brooklyn Net team that I thought would give them a lot more of a fight in that first round. And there are some people that even thought that the Brooklyn Nets would have gone out and beaten the Celtics in that first round. But obviously, we know how that transpired. They have their own question marks to worry about in the offseason, and we'll get to one in particular later. But I digress. Back to the Celtics. They had a really bad loss in Game 5 on their home court, and anyone who watched that, you probably thought that it was over, that the Bucks were going to win in Game 6. Instead, the Bucks couldn't finish the job, and then the Celtics went on, dominated Game 7, and then up against the Heat, they had another scare where they failed to close that series on home court, but they somehow found a way to get the job done in Game 7. But then by the time that series had ended, even though they had that good comeback win in Game 1, I just still did not think that they had enough to overtake the Warriors, because as you said, as far as who had the better depth, that one wasn't even a contest. It was Golden State. And then, like you said, Jaylen Brown pretty much has a bad shooting night. Jason Tatum has a bad shooting night. It's pretty much over. You kiss your title hopes goodbye. And I think the two games that really stood out to me were games 4 and 5. More so 5, because that was the game where, the Celtics had a chance to steal one on the road and take advantage of a bad night of shooting by Steph Curry. Couldn't do it. And, it put them in a situation where if they were going to even if they were going to win that game, they still had to go all the way back to California for Game 7. And even if the Celtics had somehow find a way to get things tied up, I don't think there was no doubt in my mind that the Warriors pretty much won the finals in my eyes after that Game 5 performance by Andrew Wiggins. But in any event, another thing I got to mention about the Warriors, and I think you kind of said it a little bit, the way that they arose from the ashes was nothing short of remarkable. And I'm not going to call this an underdog story, because I think once everyone fired on all cylinders, and once you saw how deep they were, I think the idea that they were really underdogs was kind of a stretch. But at the end of the day, it's still remarkable. And, I will never forget, Draymond said to KD at the end of the 2018-19 season, "Hey, we don't need you. Go leave." Turned out he was right.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, the Warriors were kind of an underdog in regards to when you look at the Western Conference. When we were starting the playoff run, a lot of people were picking the Suns. And I had said on this show, and I told you off air, and even on your other show, that as much as I thought the Suns were deep and stuff, I still was not giving up on Golden State to come out of the West, just because they had been there before. They had the players to do it. So, I think experience is a big deal. And, they've been down this road before. And, yeah, it's just – and you had said this too also, about the players with the 4 rings and 2 MVPs. It's Russell, it's Kareem, it's Magic, it's Jordan, LeBron, Duncan, and now Curry.
Kareem and LeBron, that's who I left out.
Yeah,
thank you, by the way, for helping me out on that
one.
Oh,
that's all right. Yeah, I had a bunch of notes.
Getting the assist.
I had to bring up because, numbers that don't even tell the story here. Just, the legendary moments that come out of this series. And the thing is also, you just don't see teams that, do this anymore in sports. It's hard to do with, free agency, with trades, with salary cap, with drafting. It's so hard to see teams go and do this. And, the one question we ask at the end of each season, once now we put a bow on the NBA season here, is can they do it again? And it's interesting because when you look at the 2 conferences going into next season here, and we've got the draft upcoming, we've got NBA free agency, which I think is going to be very, very fascinating. The East is going to be, the Celtics are such a young team that I think they'll definitely be good for a couple more years. You can never count out the Warriors, though, to do this again, too, just because they have the players to do it. Yeah, they're going to be another year older, but, Steve Kerr as head coach and what he's been able to do, I mean, it wouldn't be a surprise. I mean, maybe because the Warriors are another year older, that might be the only reason why you maybe want to give the Celtics a better chance to make it back here. But, the roles are reversed. The Western Conference used to be the toughest conference. I think the Eastern Conference is much tougher, though, because it's much deeper. I think the one team, though, and it's going to be a nice transition to what we talk about in a couple of moments here, that's going to be the wild card in all this is going to be the Nets. Because as we transition here, a big story that broke on Monday from Shams Charania was about Kyrie Irving. And the reports are that him and the Nets are at an impasse, and he may hit the open market. He is a player that is a possible free agent. I'm just pulling this up here because there's a few of them here that are also possible, that are free agents, and he is one of those. And the talks have been now that the Knicks and the Lakers are possible suitors for Kyrie Irving. So if you took Kyrie off the Nets and you look at what Brooklyn really has still, they would have Kevin Durant and possibly some other role players and stuff. Kyrie, we've talked about him before. He is such a headache that if I'm the Nets, I absolutely look into moving him. Now, let me tell you, though, as a Knicks fan, I do not want anything to do with Kyrie. I said that when he was on the market before. I said it when he got out of college, when he got out of when he got out of Cleveland, when he got out of Boston. I don't want him. And I'll take it. As a Knicks fan, we know that we need a point guard, but I want a point guard that is good, that is not a headache, that can stay on the court, and that can help still the Knicks technically with this rebuild. Because the Knicks, let's be fair here, the Knicks are still kind of rebuilding. I know they made that playoff run 2 seasons ago. But last year was a downfall. But what you saw, though, was their young players were rebuilding. So if you want to go after like a Brogdon, which was another name that Shams brought up from the Pacers, yeah, he's not as talented as Kyrie, but he's also not the headache, and I could live with that. The guy that I would love on the Knicks, and this is a long shot, is Jalen Brunson. I know we're talking a lot there. You're talking possibly a max contract. Look, if you go out there and get a young Jalen Brunson, bring him here with this team with a veteran presence of Derrick Rose, that to me is the guy for the Knicks. Kyrie Irving, listen to me, everybody, as a Knicks fan, Kyrie Irving is not the answer. And James Dolan and World Wide West and Leon Rose cannot do this again. All right? I'm not going for Kyrie. Now, if he wants to go to LA and be with LeBron again and create some Hollywood drama, you be my guest. You send him out west packing. I'm good with that.
Then I'll be laughing. I'll be laughing hysterically if that happens.
Well, the Nets, and this is the thing too with the Nets. The Nets need to stop trying to get all these star players and start putting a team together, because this is the thing they're running into now. Because last season you had Kyrie, who couldn't play home games because of COVID, because of the whole vaccine mandate before that got lifted late in the season. You got Kevin Durant, who's another year older, who can't stay healthy, be fair. James Harden they brought in, he also couldn't stay healthy, and now he goes to Philadelphia, and look what's happened there. So the Nets, I think, need to build. They looked like they were doing this before they went all in for Harden and traded a bunch of their valuable role players like a Jared Allen and a Karis LeVert, and then obviously they couldn't keep Spencer Dinwiddie, who were players that were very, very valuable on them. So if the right situation comes about, I'm looking to get rid of Kyrie. The Knicks, to me, though, it's an awful fit for multiple reasons. It's a headache. It's a guy who can't stay healthy, decides that he doesn't want to play sometimes, and he also hurts the rebuilding process that the Knicks are still going through.
Yeah, no, it's like the Nets have never learned from the Knicks when trying to get the names and the stars instead of like trying to build a team. At least, to borrow words from a certain victory song that their co-tenants used at Madison Square Garden, at least from what I can tell now, the Knicks are building it better than they did before. I don't know if they're the people that we're waiting for yet, but if they even tried to get Kyrie Irving, I jokingly was telling you in our group chat that I would become an NBA free agent and probably never sign with another team, but no, I'm kidding. I'm sticking with the Knicks, even if they're never going to be like ahead of, say, the Rangers or the Yankees. But like, no, if Kyrie Irving did that, that would be a monumental mistake, and I would probably be screaming at the top of my lungs, "You never learn," to James Dolan. Or I'd be screaming exactly what Michael Scott said when he found out that Toby Flenderson was back in the office. Either way, I'd be pretty mad. But if the Lakers get him, then hey, I'll be laughing hysterically, and I'll just. It's not like last year. It'll be like last year, but like worse. Whereas I'll just be laughing, especially if the Lakers go 0-82 because of those guys. Not that that's going to actually happen, but I mean, hey, a guy can dream for all this little cow comedy. No.
Yeah. But the Lakers also, that's a situation too. You're trying to build a team together, not just a group of players.
Oh my gosh!
LeBron people were trying to tell you in LA that was going to work, and that was the oldest team in the league. It was a bunch of players that just never gelled together, and when your youngest star on that team missed a good chunk of the season, it just never really. It just you knew it was not going to work.
You know what was hilarious was when Ket was a while back, I think while the playoff were in the second or third round, Kendrick Perkins suggested the idea of the Nets trading Kyrie for AD straight up. And like, that was one of the worst trade ideas possible because both of them pretty much have missed a ton of games. And oh my gosh.
Now that trade was thrown out a couple of years ago. I think it actually would have made sense for the Nets to do that.
Right.
But now I don't. Gosh, that's a tough call though. If you're the Nets,
You should have seen Stephen A's reaction to that, by the way.
Well, I've seen plenty of reaction from Stephen A over the past few days. Yes, absolutely.
So yeah, no. As far as your idea of Jalen Brunson, yeah, it may be a long shot, but If somehow the Knicks were going to find a way to get that deal done, I would say yes to that in a heartbeat, just for the sheer fact that, Johnny, correct me if I'm wrong, but was the last legit point guard we had, I don't know, Charlie Ward, or am I exaggerating?
Well, I mean, if you want to have consistent point guard that was there for a long time, that was really good, I would have to go back to Charlie Ward, yeah, because
Bad.
the year that the trade they made for Stephon Marbury, I think worked the first year, but after that, it completely fell apart. Then Larry Brown took over as head coach, and you saw Marbury with a towel over his head on the bench. When they made the trade for Marbury, it did work out in the short term, but in the long term, it did not. But all these other guys they brought in, it's just, they brought in Jason Kidd past his prime. That didn't work. The Jeremy Lin insanity, remember, lasted really 17 games, and then every time he went up against a premier point guard, he was getting schooled and embarrassed, so that didn't work. I would have – I'm just, like, off the top of my mind, you're looking for a guy that, had consistent, long, sustained success. And, I think Charlie Ward has to be the last one, because – all these other guys they brought in have just not lasted long, and then they've just fallen apart. So, I have to say it'd be Charlie Ward.
Yeah.
I mean, you want to go back before that, maybe, but the last time they had a real legit point guard, it's been a while. And the Marbury trade, again, worked out for a year, but then that just fell apart. Jason Kidd was past his prime. Jeremy Lin, no. And then they just keep bringing in other guys, and it just – that doesn't really work.
Not D-Rose. I'm not going to accept D-Rose as an answer for that question.
But to be fair, and
I mean, he did help them make the playoffs, but you knew he wasn't going to be a long-term answer.
But Hank, the reason why that worked was because of the role that Derrick Rose was put in with the Knicks last season.
Right.
And that he was a veteran bench player. They bring him in as a starter, and it didn't work. And then this past year, he had to take more. He had to play more because of the injury, and they give him that contract, and he missed a significant amount of games. And don't kid yourself, too. The Knicks were actually off to a decent start, and then when he got hurt, they never recovered from that. It's just that, and then, Julius Randle, who took a major step back last year, was part of the reason why. But you looked at the Knicks team, and, their young players have showed you, Barrett, Quickly, they're young players that they have showed you. Even Jericho Sims, who played a few games late in the season in garbage time, showed you that they do have a young group that they could build, that they could have, and Derrick Rose could be that veteran bench player. You're talking about Jalen Brunson. I'm looking at Jaden Ivey possibly in the draft this upcoming week, and we'll talk about the draft a lot next week. The draft's going to be very interesting from a Knicks perspective, because if you want to go out and get a star player and trade their draft pick, then maybe that'll work as well. So we'll have to see. But, here's the thing I would say, and I'm not going to make this a Knicks and Nets thing, but because they're the two local teams, the Nets are the better team, but they are more of a mess than the Knicks are too. And I will deal with the Knicks possibly stinking it up again next year if, the rebuild continues, they go in the right direction. Because I believe that the Knicks, if they can get these young players and Randall bounces back, I think the Knicks can rebound to be a playoff team next season. I really do. But I also don't want to try and go for the fences here and bring in somebody who I think just disrupts this rebuild process, that does not help the roster, that misses more games than he plays, is more of a headache, and we talk about him more off the court than on. Look at all the things that has happened with Kyrie Irving since he's been a Brooklyn Net. Whether it was down in the bubble, whether it was the fact that he wasn't vaccinated, which really that was the least of the problems that Kyrie's had is that he wasn't vaccinated. So I just don't want to deal with that. If Kyrie was a Knick, these stories would be exploded 10 times more, because the Knicks would not be winning. So that's my whole aspect. This whole talk about Kyrie going to the Knicks, you keep him far away. You either keep him in Brooklyn or you send him west to the Lakers. I don't want anything to do with him. I'm ready for the draft though on Thursday. It's gonna be interesting with the Knicks, what they do here. I know Jaden Ivey's a guy that's been talked about a lot. He was talking on Monday about how he would love to be a Knick. So we'll find out what the Knicks do at number 11. But this, and then also the NBA Finals, a great story. with the Golden State Warriors, and we'll find out if they can do it again even next season. I mean, it's truly a remarkable ride what they've done. But switching gears here, Hank, a big story that developed this past week, it broke late on Thursday and into Friday, was in wrestling. And this was with Chairman Vince McMahon, who had to step aside during an investigation into alleged hush money payments. So the first guy I thought of when this story broke was Tom Albano, who you know from Empty the Bench here on the Empty the Bench Podcast Network, also a fan-sided and also host of the brand new show, the MMA Outsiders, which will be debuting in late July. And earlier this week, we had a chance to catch up with Tom to talk about this. Well, here on Game On, we covered the biggest games and all the latest sports news, and there was a lot of sports news this past week, including in the WWE, as their big boy, Vince McMahon, stepped aside as chairman of the WWE. And here to talk about that is the co-host. You know him here on Empty the Bench, and he's also contributor to Fanside MMA and co-host of a brand new podcast here that's coming in late July on the Empty the Bench Podcast Network called the MMA Outsiders. And joining us is Tom Albano. Tom, welcome. How are you?
I'm doing well, Johnny. Hank, thanks for having me on here. It's been quite the week. Usually I'm covering the MMA side of things, but every now and again I dip my toes into the WWE waters because it's where I got my combat love from. And well, here we are with quite the story on our hands. And I have to say that I never would have imagined a day where the WWE existed without Vincent Kennedy McMahon until the day he died. And well, here is that day. Here is that day that actually has happened. Vince hasn't died, obviously, but he has stepped aside. Well, but I'll get more into that through our little discussion here.
Yeah, I was a wrestling fan growing up. I grew up in the Attitude Era of the 90s into early 2000s. I would say it's probably been 20 years since I last put on a WWE event. But, it comes up in my feed every now and then. So I know it for sure. And, like you said, the name McMahon, whether it's Vince or Shane or Stephanie or even Linda, even when she was in the Trump administration, you when you think of Linda McMahon, you thought of WWE. So the McMahon name, it's always stuck there. And for the WWE to get this much attention, it almost took like a story like this. So when this news broke, it broke. The Wall Street Journal reported on, and then I saw something from the Hollywood Reporter on Friday morning about it. Tom, when this first broke, what was your initial thoughts about it?
Taken aback, because these kind of actions, I mean, Vince, I should clarify that a controversy like this, Vince is no stranger to. There have been multiple allegations of misconduct behind the scenes at WWE for the last 30-ish, 40-ish years, however long Vince has owned the WWE for at this point. But it still kind of was shocking because everything was kind of, to borrow a term that has been used as part of this ongoing story, business as usual, that it was just another week, just another wrestling week. It was just going to be another Wednesday with AEW at night, SmackDown coming up on Friday. The wrestling world was kind of in a little bit of a loop on the WWE side of things with Cody Rhodes and Seth Rollins. Cody Rhodes and Randy Orton being injured, so two baby faces went down. So it's like not fully pushing the panic button, but then something like this, again, the controversy itself and who it relates to, maybe not so much a jaw dropper, but the fact that it all of a sudden came out, so suddenly was a bit of a jaw dropper. And like I said, I never thought Vince McMahon would one day step aside as chairman. Now, is he actually stepping aside? I mean, I don't really think so, because Stephanie McMahon, his daughter, is the interim chairwoman and CEO, but Vince is still, part of the creative process, which is evidently clear if you watch SmackDown and you saw Roman and Brock again, because I think he has a fetish for that feud. but 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 it is just absolutely kind of shocking, and the fact that even though he's stepped aside, he still has a voice though, because I guarantee you, even though Stephanie is named the interim chairwoman, they will go to Vince for any big decision still. It is still his company. And I think you kind of saw that in his little 30-second appearance on SmackDown this past week.
Yeah, I was going to just get to that. So then it's announced that he's going to appear on SmackDown on Friday night, and it was very, very brief. And well, like you said, it was like 30 seconds, if that. I mean, maybe it was really more of a ratings ploy for the WWE. Because
I think it is. It was. Let's be clear. It was.
If you think about it, for the last 20 years, they haven't really had any competition. I mean, back in like the late 90s, early 2000s, you had WCW, you had ECW. You didn't really have another wrestling league or another kind of combat league until these last several years with what you cover, UFC, MMA. Now you got
all elite wrestling,
AEW, all that stuff. So when Vince's his appearance on SmackDown that Friday night, and then you were telling me before, and I noticed it too, that WWE turned off the comments to that segment. So what does that all mean?
Okay, because their mindset, Johnny, is business as usual. There was a report from the wrestling journalists that I follow, namely one Sean Ross Sapp over at Fightful, that there's like an internal memo going around behind the scenes at the E, which states that everything is just going to be business as usual, which is kind of weird. We do have this Vince stepping aside, but remember, there's also John Laurinaitis, the head of talent relations. He also has been, in these allegations of misconduct, but you haven't heard anything about him. Everything's just been solely focused on Vince. My belief was going to be, and still kind of is, that eventually John Laurinaitis will serve as what we would call in the sports world, the fall guy, that he will end up, fading away in the background while Vince holds on. And that's kind of the thing with that little promo, because Vince walked out right at the very start of SmackDown and said, the signature we have at the start of every WWE program, which you, Johnny, you might remember, was when you were watching all those little flashing signs that eventually go into the WWF logo at every start of every program, or they would say the World Wrestling Federation for over 50 years, like that kind of thing. The one for the one for today is like 3-4 words with a whole bunch of wrestling clips, like then, now, forever, together. And Vince said, he reiterated those words and said the most important is together. So I guess trying to play to the WWE audience the "we're all in this together" card, which no, Vince, no, you're on your own on this one, buddy. But number one, it is that. Number two, like you said, it was a ratings ploy. Number three, I kind of took it as a message of, I'm not going away. And think about it. The competition with WCW, where Vince and WWF nearly went out of business. The steroid scandal. Some of the scandals of the 80s and early 90s, like the Ring Boy scandal, where, for those of you who don't know, Ring Boys were basically told that in order to kind of get ahead, they needed to, the joke there. A whole bunch of scandals. The Jimmy Snuka murder that actually happened in the 80s, and then right before he died, he went on trial for, that Vince might have played a role in covering it up. All these crazy stories about Vince, but he always has survived everything, and the E, is still going strong today. That's kind of the message that I was getting there, is that, no matter what happens, no matter how much I say, I'm going to accept the results of the investigation, it kind of sent off a message of, you're not going to get rid of me.
Yeah, but you think about it, like, so we've heard stories like, these kind of alleged investigations into this kind of stuff in other aspects of the world before, and a lot of the time those guys don't survive it. So I think this is a little bit of a different animal in that regard. But yeah, there might be more stuff that comes out in the coming days and weeks about it. And if there is, then I think Vince is going to have a tough time surviving.
And granted, I think that's why there's a lot more publicity on this one, because actually in 2006 he had an allegation of this, for your regular sports fans, is going to sound familiar, heading into a massage parlor and getting more than a massage. You think more along the lines of the whole Robert Kraft thing.
Right.
But, this isn't the 90s. This isn't the 2000s. I think this relationship started around 2019 and headed into now the 2020s. It's a much different time. There's a lot more, social media, a lot more media just in general. Stories and allegations like this can go around. And for Vince, this is, I will say, even though this is not the first time we've had allegations, even though Vince is saying, oh, you're not going to get rid of me that easily, and technically he still is part of WWE, I do think this is Vince's biggest threat to his power since the government came after him in the 1990s for the steroid trial. I think it really is. Now, does that mean you're going to get rid of him? I don't know. And I don't know how independent this independent investigation is that they're saying. Now, granted, give credit where credit is due to the WWE Board of Directors, because they did notice something. They did receive that anonymous email saying, hey, my friend here, I feel like was being, used in this kind of relationship, noticing the jump in salary to $200,000 when the two began the relationship, her quitting and taking the $3 million hush money, as we call it, to keep quiet about everything. Credit where credit is due, but they're talking so much about an independent investigation and that they're going to work independently. I don't know. As much as we see something like how he stepped aside again, I'm inclined to believe not true. I'm inclined to believe he has still a voice, and I'm inclined to believe that until I see otherwise, until I see with my own two eyes, Vince McMahon will always be a part of the WWE in one way or another. Now, the whole question here is, it's not so much the affair. It's not so much this little allegation. It's more a matter of the hush money. And, this is kind of a question we might even find ourselves in with some sports teams. And that's, where is the line between money in an owner's pocket, in this case, Vince McMahon, and money in the franchise, or in this case, the WWE? Because remember, WWE has to answer to shareholders. They went public in 1999. So something like this, those shareholders are not going to stand for. But they're especially not going to stand, it's really a little fucked up to say that they won't stand more for money being used as hush money than an affair allegation. But it is kind of true, because in a way, you are playing with people's money. And that's where this whole investigation is going, is how did he use money meant for WWE to keep this hush money? Because if he did, that's where most of this trouble is going to happen. And that's when I can see, well, hitting the fan.
Mm-hmm. And you got something?
Yeah, I've got one question regarding this whole thing, or really regarding Vince McMahon himself. So we know that Vince McMahon has been pretty much the face of not really just WWE, but more like the whole wrestling community in general.
Mm-hmm.
He's been through a whole bunch of scandals, such as the steroid stuff that you mentioned. But now we have this whole thing coming on his hands, and with what's probably going to happen to WWE in the after effects of this, I think I have to ask the question: Is he potentially going to be doing more damage to his respective sport than this man?
Good old Rob Manfred. We were going to get to that later on in the show, but let's bring it up now.
I mean, it's fun. Even when we're talking about professional wrestling, which is a whole other industry in itself, not just, it dips toes in both sports and entertainment, we still bring up a good old Rob Manfred here on the Empty the Bench Network.
Absolutely.
Wouldn't be an episode without it.
Yeah.
But honestly, Hank, I could see it. Because granted, Rob Manfred is out to destroy his sport. I say it enough on Empty the Bench. But Vince McMahon, he had Rob Manfred, as far as we know, has no allegation like this in front of us.
That's right.
It's about
Now,
one of the only
granted,
good
Vince
things we can
McMahon-
say about him.
Right. And granted, Vince McMahon, you may not like the professional wrestling product that the WWE or sports entertainment product that the WWE puts out these days. But in history, with things like WrestleMania, the Monday Night Wars, the Attitude Era that Johnny, you mentioned before, he did, have great successes for this industry, and for better or for worse, with good intentions or for evil intentions, he did revolutionize the industry. So maybe he has done more to put professional wrestling on a whole other scale that Rob Manfred could only wish he brought baseball back to. But he also has put some damages into his industry that Rob Manfred really has not reached yet. As much as Rob Manfred has done on the field damage to sport, when is he ever going to do damage to the sport off the field? Remains to be seen, but so far, again, it hasn't gone to the level that Vince has here.
Yeah. Talking with Tom Albano here on the show. Tom, the one thing I would bring up also with McMahon here is in this day and age, too, the WWE has now TV deals with NBC Universal. Raw airs on the USA Network. Peacock has the rights to its premium events, not like pay-per-views and stuff. Fox Corp airs SmackDown, and it's also expanded its programming to other outlets. It used to just be the two networks. It used to be TNT or what was it? TBN or
Are you talking about for WWE and WCW? You're talking about Monday Night War?
I'm sorry, I was used to talk. It was USA. I'm sorry, USA on Monday Night Raw, and it used to be like UPN 9 SmackDown.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, so it used to just be those two networks, and now it's expanded. With this day and age, and sponsorships and stuff too. I think the one thing, and I'll get your thoughts on this. If you start seeing some of these TV deals get affected, if you start seeing sponsors going away from it, that's usually another sign that the guy who's could be involved here could be in trouble. So if the TV deals or if like the sponsors and stuff start getting involved in this, you think that would play a factor in McMahon here?
But that's the thing. They have to get involved in this. And so far, as of Sunday night, June 19th, heading into, this week, no. So far, they haven't gotten involved in this as far as I know. And it's funny that you bring that up, Johnny, because when WWE went PG in 2008, following, the Eddie Guerrero death, the Chris Benoit incident, and trying to crack down on performance enhancers and trying to put a more family-friendly product out there. And 3-hour rules that people are always complaining about, that there's too much filler and whatnot. The thing is, they have expanded their revenue completely. I mean, their revenue is at such a different format from when, Johnny, you were watching, because it was always build up to the pay-per-view. But you know what? They earn more money from television rights deals all around the world for programs like Monday Night Raw rather than the pay-per-views these days. Thanks to also their little WWE network, which is now Peacock. Yeah. So WWE is making money hand over fist. They still make money hand over fist, and that you see with some of the controversies they had over the last couple of years with all these cuts in April, when they're still making all this money. I think, again, these companies have to get involved, but if they do get involved, are they going to get involved temporarily? Or, because again, is this going to be like a thing where if Vince, that they're just going to step aside, and then once all this little drama kind of simmers back down, everything is just going to be, to quote Vince's little internal memo, business as usual. And if they don't get involved at all, what that's telling me is something like this, they're not exactly going to care for, because again, Stephanie is still interim CEO, and they'll be looking more at the business side, where WWE can they think that WWE can make money hand over fist regardless of whatever happens in this little incident. And again, knowing Vince's little history with scandals and such and surviving scandals, I mean, it's a fair argument. It's disgusting to say, but it's a fair argument.
Absolutely. Okay.
Yeah. No, I pretty much agree. I think you said it best. Vince McMahon is nuts. And yeah, from what I understand, very, very damaging.
And that's the thing.
And probably even worse than He Who Must Not Be Named that like I already clowned before.
And the thing is, some people might ask me about Vince doing this for attention. If you're talking about the little action on SmackDown, him coming out for 30 seconds saying we're all in this together and welcome to SmackDown, yeah, little ratings pop, sickly utilizing this controversy for a little ratings pop for SmackDown.
Oh,
but in terms of making this, like into a storyline thing, no, you wouldn't. I would not go that far. And I think if he somehow did, I think that would do even more damage to this industry, not just to the WWE, but the whole industry of professional wrestling, than even this crime alone can do. Or
in other words,
little allegation alone could do.
In other words, no chance in hell.
That's. I knew we were gonna get that in somewhere.
Yep, I had to.
Well, I'll tell you what. This is gonna be fascinating because you know what? Like I told you, somebody like me who hasn't watched the WWE in over 20 years, when this story broke late last week, it caught my attention. So, and there may be more to this in the coming days and weeks. So we will. We'll find out, but definitely a very fascinating story. And like you said before, Tom, these stuff hasn't brought down McMahon before, but we live in a day and age now where stuff like this happens, and if they start coming after the sponsors and money starts becoming a factor, you'll see a change. That's unfortunately usually always comes down to dollars and cents. Unfortunately, that's usually how it is. But
as Vince himself always says, it's all about the money.
Yeah, there's Or as Shane's one of Shane's songs.
Oh, here comes the money.
Yeah, money. Oh man, but we'll find out. But Tom, I want to plug in your new show coming up here to the Empty the Bench podcast network coming up July 22nd. The MMA Outsiders with you and Zan Bando. What can we expect from that coming up on July 27th?
Okay, so you can expect reviews and previews of all the big UFC cards, as well as Bellator cards, PFL cards, interviews with some major talents in the MMA scene, like Bellator fighters, maybe some UFC fighters, interviews with fighters who are on the rise, competing in these little regional promotions. We would call them in the Big Four sports the minor leagues. Seeing those names and eventually maybe seeing them eventually reach the UFC, Bellator, and whatnot. Also, talk about bets, about fighting, bets on fights. You got a whole lot of, of course, talk about MMA news, kind of like what we do with Empty the Bench and here on Game On, talking about the big news in the MMA industry. Zan has ridden with me at Fan-Sided MMA for a few years now, and, he's got an incredible mind, and hopefully the two of us with our chemistry can put together a great show for all the MMA fans to enjoy, the hardcore ones, and maybe offer casual fans and people who haven't been exposed to MMA a little, they can dip their toes into the water easy.
Absolutely, and as Tom usually closes out his Empty the Bench previews, of course, also you can catch Tom Albano along with Nick Federa and Nick Morganson on Empty the Bench Wednesdays at 3 p.m. Eastern here on the Empty the Bench podcast network. And as Tom always says, be there, right?
Be there.
So we're looking forward to that, but definitely this will be a very interesting thing with McMahon and the WWE going forward. Tom Albano joining us here on the show. Tom, thanks so much, and we'll catch up again real soon. All right.
Take care, guys. Thanks for having me on.
You got it. And our thanks once again to Tom Albano, co-host of Empty the Bench and also contributor to Fan-Sided and host of the new MMA podcast, along with Zan, coming up on July 27th. That is the MMA Outsiders here on the Empty the Bench podcast network. Hank, got a few more minutes here on the show, and we got a few topics we'll get into to wrap it up here. Number one, obviously, is Deshaun Watson once again making news this week, because what would it be about more news about Watson. So Washington Post broke this story last week by Mark Mask about the NFL's going to argue for a significant suspension of the Browns quarterback. So multiple people familiar with the case were saying that they should receive a significant suspension, and a person on Watson's side of the case said the league, quote, probably will seek a suspension of 1 full season for Watson. So right now, as we discuss this, we know that Watson has got 24 civil lawsuits still. The 22 and then the 2 after the HBO series. So I tell you, when you look at this, significant to me, Hank, though, is you've got to go north of 1 year, because if you're going to suspend somebody like Calvin Ridley for a year for gambling, this to me, and I know he's been cleared from the federal side of things from this court of law, but he's still right now we still don't know about the guilty aspect in the NFL terms of this. So if you want to talk about significant, and if you're the NFL, you want to prove a point that behavior like this is unacceptable, it should be no less than more than 1 full year.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when you've got 26 accusations against him, and when you have a player who got suspended for only for only betting on what to him would be considered like pennies and dimes, like something's not quite right here. And something's obviously been very wrong with the way Roger Goodell has doled out suspensions in the NFL. So one can only hope they do the right thing and at least give Deshaun Watson a significant punishment, because it's obvious to me that guy is an absolute monster.
I think this is the biggest problem that
26 women. Seriously.
That we know about. We don't know if there's going to be more.
Well, yeah, no, that's the scary part.
Right? Because 2 of these have come out after the HBO series that with Bryant with Gumbel. And so if we're only at, I want to say only, we're at 24 now. We don't know there's going to be any more. And I do think that this is the biggest problem that Roger Goodell has had as the commissioner of the NFL has been when it comes down to handing suspensions for stuff like this, whether it's any sort of domestic incidents or any sort of assaults or, anything that involves bad behavior. And just think about the optics of something like this. If he gets 6 to 8 games and you're talking about, a player gambling, which, that whole angle with Calvin Ridley is one thing, but he gets more than Watson, who would get 6 to 8 games. I just think that would look so bad on the league's angle if that was the case. So I'm just hoping that the NFL doesn't fumble this case away. We'll see. A couple of things also with this real quick too. So the Browns are scheduled to open training camp on July 27th. Just more in this Washington Post piece. They're hoping that the person with knowledge of the matter said that they're hoping that this entire disciplinary process is completed by the start of the training camp. So training camp, July 27th. We've been waiting to see, this is now carried on for a long, long time. And I understand, the investigation, it's got to happen. But, I don't know. The longer this goes, I'm starting to really wonder if we're going to look at a very quote-unquote significant suspension. And what I mean by that, to me, 6 to 8 games is not significant. That's about half a season. You want to go significant and you want to prove a point here, you got to go at least north of 1 year. And if there are more cases, if there are more lawsuits and there are more cases of stuff like this involving Watson, it's got to be more than a year. It's just it's got to be. And we'll find out, but it's just how this has been handled, how this has been described. It's a very, very difficult topic to talk about. Obviously, we have to, but it's crazy.
Yeah, no, I think something's going to go down sooner rather than later, and I think my prediction for what happens next is quite obvious. I would say you're either going to hear a lot of people celebrating a severe punishment or an outrage that he's not going to get enough of a suspension. And unfortunately, my gut's telling me what's going to happen is we're going to get the latter, just because, again, I know we've shat on Rob Manfred, and rightfully so, but Goodell's had his own screw-ups in his own ways, and it's been universally known. So that's really my whole take on it. I really think he should be like out completely. That's just me. I don't tolerate stuff like that.
Very, 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 very fair. So switching gears here, Hank, big news in hockey. Well, not big news, but kind of significant news for at least us Ranger fans.
Yes.
Is that the Flyers hired John Tortorella as head coach. Kevin Weeks of ESPN reported this last week, and he's reported that Tortorella, who's 63, agreed to a 4-year contract with the Flyers. And so my initial thoughts on this, I like the move for Philly.
Mm-hmm.
I think they needed a guy there, a legitimate, capable head coach. Because to me, their roster, they are not a great team. They are a team that's had problems in multiple ways on the ice. I mean, they've been a mess the last few years. And I think Tortorella at least provides some experience. He provides some, he's very, very smart as a head coach. I'll tell you that. I mean, you listen to him talk. Yeah, he gets very passionate with the reporters, but
ask Larry Brooks.
Brooksy, yeah, you go watch that YouTube thing with Torts. But I got to tell you, I mean, I love Tortorella as a head coach. You know, he has had success pretty much everywhere he's gone. You know, as the Lightning head coach, he won a Stanley Cup there. Yeah, he was only in Vancouver for 1 year, which I totally forgot about before we did the show today. But yeah, so I mean, we obviously know about his success down in Tampa. When he was the Ranger head coach, you know, he got the Rangers to multiple playoff runs, and you know, he's just a very, very smart guy when you hear him talk and stuff. He knows what he's doing. But this is going to be, and I think he does provide the Flyers, you know, with something. But the thing is, the Flyers, to me, they don't have a lot of talent on the team. And that's where I think you look at Torts, and this is going to be his test here, is trying to do this with a team that, you know, who do they really have? That's what I look at it. But I like the move for Philly. I actually think this could, because of his smarts and stuff, I think this could actually elevate Philadelphia a little bit. But yeah.
Yeah, the Flyers are a team that are an absolute mess. Let me go over some of the players that are stuck under like terrible contracts. You got Kevin Hayes for starters, another former Ranger, by the way.
Yeah.
Cam Atkinson, Travis Konechny, and then that's not even getting into the disaster known as Rasmus Ristolainen, who look at what they traded to get him, and then they doubled down and like gave him like a 7-year contract. Like it's not a well-constructed team. It's like that. If you look at what they've done in past off seasons, it's like they've been signing guys just for the sake of like making moves. But the problem is they don't even like have a legitimate plan for what they're doing. But as far as hiring Tortorella goes, I think this is a move that can either have some semblance of success, or it could be a move that ends up failing entirely. Why I think it could be successful? I mean, look at his reputation. This is a guy who's emphasized blocking shots and defense. And Johnny, you and I, as hardcore Ranger fans, we know that all too well. I mean, I'm pretty sure you and your dad had season tickets like while he was the coach, no?
Yes,
so,
we had a half plan. Yep.
Yeah, no. So he's probably going to be emphasizing that, which could very well be helpful for their goalie, Carter Hart, who's definitely struggled over the past few years, although not a lot. I wouldn't say all of it's really his fault, because when you look at the team around him, it's not great. But in any event, I also think it could fail because, again, if you look at his personality, for him to really be successful, a lot of players have to really buy into his system. And even if, let's say, he does succeed and by some miracle lead the Flyers to, say, a playoff spot or two, eventually he's going to wear out his welcome. Look what happened even with the Lightning. Like, he won a cup there, but eventually, and that was his longest tenured team, he eventually got fired once they declined, although that was really more due to their ownership situation than anything else. You look at what happened with the Rangers. I mean, he's one of only a few coaches that have led them to the conference finals. But then 1 year later, even though he led them to the second round against the Bruins, a lot of guys really were not happy with him. And even though at the time I thought it was probably a mistake them letting him go, it's obvious now in hindsight that letting him go in favor of AV was probably the right move, even if later on I wasn't really a big fan of Alain Vigneault myself, who ironically was the previous Flyer coach. But that's neither here nor there. And then you look at the failed tenure in Vancouver, and then even with Columbus, he's the only head coach in Columbus Blue Jackets history to lead them to a playoff series win. But again, he ended up leaving on his own terms. But I think part of that had to do with the fact that not everybody on the team wanted to play for him, or not everybody really liked his style. So it could potentially be a high risk, high reward. I wouldn't be surprised if somehow they made a playoff run or two, maybe not a long playoff run, but it's not a guy who's somebody you hire for long-term success. That's one thing that I've taken away from Tortorella over the past.
So would you say that he does not make it through the 4-year contract that he got? Because I don't, I
no
do,
chance.
As much as I say that I think the Flyers will have improved success with Tortorella, I also think you're looking at maybe year 3, and if they don't seem to elevate it, then he could be out after year 3. We could be talking about that again.
Yeah, no, he's in that sense. Yeah, no, he's similar to Mike Keenan, although the difference is at least he's had longer tenures than Mike Keenan, who's Mike Keenan's had tenures where he'll go somewhere for 1 or 2 years, and then after the second year, he'll do enough damage to where they tell him, go get out of here.
It's funny because when I was doing my research, I totally forgot that he was in Columbus for 6 years, Tortorella. He's the winningest coach in franchise history. So, I mean, you look at where Columbus was before him, and they qualified for the playoffs in 4 of the 6 seasons. They didn't get out of the first round except for one time when they shocked Tampa Bay, but
eventually created a monster while shocking Tampa Bay.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. No. So I think it's like you said. I think the Flyers do improve in that regard, but how long it lasts, I think you're looking at year 3, and we're probably, talking about him being on the market again. So. But I just thought about this as being a guy who was with the Rangers, and I like Tortorella when he was on TV and stuff. So I think it does help the Flyers out in some ways, but also you don't think the Flyers can be as bad as they were last year. I mean, they were 8-11-4 when they fired Vigneault, and then after that they went 17-36-7.
By the way, how does it? By the way, it's a real dang shame AV didn't have a legendary goaltender to bail him out of a lot of situations like he did in New York.
Yeah, that does help a little bit too.
I'm sorry, I cannot resist. I'm almost as bad as Attard when it comes to taking shots at the Flyers.
I'm sure they do it to us too. So the only difference is the success that the Rangers have had in the 21st century versus the Flyers. Especially from 05 on, I'd say. I mean, the Flyers do have that one.
They had that Cinderella Stanley Cup final run, and since then, the Rangers have made a run as well, and they've since rebuilt and been back to contenders in all the years since the Flyers have last made the Cup. So what does that tell you?
Yeah, the one rough run was when they knocked us out last game of the season.
I still don't know why Tortorella went with Olli Jokinen as your shooter in the third round of the shootout, but that's an angry moment for another day.
And I only brought that up because it was Torts. So,
I remember. Listen, I remember the Tortorella era of the Rangers very well, and probably better than what I had for breakfast. In fact, I remember. No, it's true. The 2011-2012 was the first really deep run that I got to experience as a Ranger fan. I mean, I remember the 07 loss to the Buffalo Sabres in the second round. I remember beating the Devils in 08. Thank you, Sean Avery, for pissing off Marty.
Oh, yes.
I remember blowing it against the Capitals. That was Tortorella's first year. Remember, he came actually as the interim coach when they fired Tom Rennie. I remember, as you said, the Flyers shootout. I remember the "Can You Hear Us" disaster against Washington in 2011.
Oh, yes.
I remember the 2011-2012 season, which I think Attard called them this, but I think everyone pretty much called them the black and blue shirts that year, because it wasn't a roster you looked at and said, oh, this is a Stanley Cup contender. No, he built a team that was probably like maybe 2 or 3 points away from probably winning the President's Trophy. 1-2 hard-fought series, but much like a series that happened 10 years later, you know, they get to the conference finals, and against the Devils, they essentially ran out of gas. And and it's funny, I actually met Mike Rupp at a bar like before Game 3 of the Carolina Hurricane series. He was at a season ticket holder event, and Mike Rupp essentially said the same thing, that was a fun team, but he said that eventually the team got like burned out from a lot of what Tortorella did. And, you know, looking back, it pretty much made sense, because I've pretty much looked back at that team numerous times in the 10 years since.
Yeah, no, that is for sure. But we'll find out what happens with Torts. Hank, to close out the show, you know, it wouldn't be a week without talking about Deshaun Watson, and it wouldn't be a week without talking about good old Rob Manfred. And people are wondering, oh, Johnny, now what do you have to bash on him about? Well, so this past week, Manfred spoke with reporters after an owners meeting, and also had spoke with Evan Drellich of The Athletic, who was one of the best reporters during the MLB lockout. And there were talks, you know, Manfred had talked about the Rays and the A's having to look for new stadiums, which I think is inevitable. I think that's going to happen. But there's one thing that came out of the press conference this week, the talks this week, with not only the reporters after the owners meeting, but also with Drellich, that just caught my attention. And that is the fact that Manfred was talking about challenging ball strike calls. You have got to be kidding me, Rob.
I'm sorry, what?
So he spoke with Evan Drellich about possibly a challenging ball strike calls. And how do we know that?
Really?
Well, in select low A Southeast games, teams are allowed to challenge 3 pitches. And I'm saying, and here's the thing. So Manfred is trying to speed this game up. And the things that he's done to try and speed this game up, which to me have not done anything at all except cause more confusion and more frustration, whether it's the 3 batter minimum with the relief pitchers, which I think is a joke, whether it's limiting visits to the mound, which I think is a joke, whether it's now supposedly the whole instant replay thing. Instant replay in general is a joke. Unfortunately, it's a sign of the times, but it's still bad. You're talking now, you're thinking about possibly implementing a ball strike challenge. And why is that? Because he said, quote, I have to say, I saw 3 challenges in the minor league games. The first one was so darn fast, I missed it. What happened? Rob, it's the minor leagues. It's low A ball in the Southeast. Come on. You know what you're doing by doing this? You are taking the human element out of baseball and out of sports. And yeah, do we notice that umpires make bad calls? They do. There's no question about it. Some of that is on them. Some of that is also on the fact that the technology this day and age is so unbelievable. I've been watching the College World Series, because that to me has been more enjoyable than Major League Baseball. And I say that as the Mets and the Yankees continue to do unbelievable things through the first nearly 3 months of the season. But I'm seeing them challenge stuff. There was a game the other day that was a 15-run game, and they still were challenging a safe out call. And all these challenges and stuff, it just slows the game down and makes it unbearable. Hank, if I told you, and Rob's saying that this is not going to happen in 2023, but you're challenging a ball strike call. I mean, really? First of all, we technically don't know what necessarily the strike zone for everybody is different. So how are we gonna prove it that it actually was a strike and how it wasn't?
Let me think. You're not.
Yeah.
You won't. All it's gonna do is just it's not gonna speed up the game. It's just gonna make it slower. We're gonna have more of these. Oh, that was a ball when it was called a strike. Okay, back to the game.
Yeah, I don't mind hearing that once per night. On my TV when Final Jeopardy's happening. I don't need to be.
No, I love that tune, but I don't need to hear it 3 times just to slow down a baseball game. It's like that. I don't know what movie that was from, but it's like the scene where the guy goes, "Well, we're waiting."
I just want to know, and supposedly this they're saying that there's no rule change imminent, but the concept seems to be moving in the right direction. I just want to know, how does this help the game by doing this? Why? Because you get the call right? There's no positive to this. I mean, I'm trying not to like blow my mind right now as I talk to you.
What's going to happen next? They're going to like hire a robot for a weatherman to challenge whenever he gets something wrong.
Yeah, we still haven't gotten into all the stuff that's happening next season. Other topics that Manfred had talked about was that the new competition committee is going to evaluate a pitch clock and limits on defensive shifts, and Manfred hopes for a recommendation ahead of spring training. Again, the pitch clock, that I kind of see it being inevitable, and that's kind of understandable. The pitch clock, that's fine. The limits on the defensive shift, I said you can't ban the shift. Now, limiting it, still, to me, not good enough. There should be no limits or banning of the shift. Again, we've spoken about this before. Beat the shift, don't ban the shift. That might be a new banner on the show, because we continue to talk about it all the time. Joey Gallows, he complains again about the shift. I'm like, beat it, don't ban it.
Mm-hmm.
And if you can't do it, then you know what? Then we need to like, I don't know. We got to teach these kids when they're playing baseball in grade school about this. Maybe the training, maybe the coaching has to be better too. The training's got to be better because these guys are dropping like flies in the game. But the whole fundamental part about it, there you go. Don't ban the shift, beat it. That's right. There we go. You saved that. That's what we need to. That's what we need to do. So there's that. And one other thing that has to be discussed with Manfred this week was Manfred says, quote, "We are concerned about our reach," in talking about the MLB hoping to increase digital offerings of games in an era of declining cable viewers. Rob, the numbers are declining because the game is starting to become unwatchable. It's not that, the cable packages or whatnot. It's this game. The game is unwatchable. I'll be honest with you. I watch the highlights on these sports shows in the morning. I'm not sitting down for 3 to 4 hours breaking down every pitch of every game. I got to be honest with you. I haven't. I haven't spent the money for the extra innings package this year because of what's been going on. Us Yankee fans are missing an eighth of the games because they are on Apple TV, on Amazon Prime, and they're on Peacock. How are we getting more fans when a lot of your fans cannot get the Amazon Prime and the Peacock and the Apple TV Plus package? And if you want to grow it through Apple TV Plus, why are you scheduling it on a Friday night when a lot of people are not home? They go out after a long week of work. They're not going to put on their Apple phone. They're not going on their phones and putting the game on. They're just not. And then the product on the field is suffering. All the rule changes are suffering. The way that, you rushed through spring training and these guys are dropping like flies, that's bad. There's just so much bad that's happening in the sport. So you're concerned about your reach. Maybe it's not the fact that the viewership is declining on cable. It's declining because of the product that's on the field.
He is so delusional and tone deaf. It's ridiculous.
I've said this, and I've said this to you, and I've said this to the guys, and I've said this to everybody in general. When the CBA is up again, we are going to have another lockout in baseball. And this one is going to last much longer than the 99-day lockout that we just went through.
And it's not going to be pretty either.
You look at the Stanley Cup playoffs and the numbers don't sound great, but you look at their numbers and you see how great that hockey's doing this year. Because that is a fun competitive product. I've had people down here in South Carolina that don't know rats about hockey, and they've been watching these games and they've been entertained. Think about that for a second. South Carolina, which is not a hockey town. I mean, yeah, you have some Carolina Hurricane fans. Maybe you have some New York Ranger fans like us that have transplanted down here. But South Carolina is not a diehard hockey town. And I've known people, we've actually been in bars watching the Stanley Cup playoffs.
And I And listen, I went to game 6. You obviously know about me going to game 6 of the conference finals.
Absolutely.
Everywhere I looked around the city of Tampa, you would see some sort of like Go Bolts banner hanging somewhere. And like, I also may have told you, this was one of the first times I ever went to that arena, because I'd been there a few times in years past during Yankee spring training, coincidentally, while the Rangers were there as well. So I just so happened to be lucky. There were like so many Lightning fans, like, and you look at all the bars that were there, like, you would never imagine that a city in Florida, even partially, obviously, this is because of the fact that the team was winning, but even in 2018, I saw some people getting excited about the Lightning. And this was really before like they started winning championships. I mean, by that point, they were slowly turning into a powerhouse, but like that would only really take, say, a monumental upset by the Washington Capitals. See what I did there? And then a even worse upset against the Columbus Blue Jackets, 62 wins and no in the regular season, nothing in the playoffs. That city became really like hockey oriented. And can you imagine? And like it's amazing because Matt, it's amazing what good ownership can do to a hockey team. But I digress. That's another city that's gotten a lot with like playoff hockey. And imagine if the Florida Panthers could have ever found a way to like market their team, or like had ownership that like knew how to run, to hire the right people the way that the Tampa Bay Lightning did. And imagine if the Atlanta Thrashers were able to be run by the right people instead of Atlanta Sport or whatever they were called, running them into the ground and then allowing that group from Canada to buy them and move them to Winnipeg.
I mean, I was watching ESPN before we wrap it up here. I was watching ESPN when game 1 of the Stanley Cup Finals was about to start. The day of, they spent so much time on the Stanley Cup Finals. I don't remember a year that ESPN went almost wall to wall on the Stanley Cup Finals. And they would not do that for a World Series game. They would not do that for an MLB playoff game. It just goes to show you that I think hockey is finally going the right direction.
The only thing I'll say about that is I wish ESPN had better like coverage, like announcer wise, because Sean McDonough doesn't quite do it for me. It's one of those days where I say I miss Doc Emmerich.
Well, that's fair. I mean, I know people have complained about that. I'll be honest with you. I have not had a problem with McDonough.
And the camera angles can be a little bit like
you know what, the camera angles, maybe they're trying to get a little bit too cute on.
Yeah.
But I have to be fair. I think ESPN's coverage of the Stanley Cup playoffs as a whole has been great. You know, Ray Ferraro and I were in like almost lockstep on, and I hate to
Ray Ferraro
what happened.
He's
and I hate to and I think Emily Kaplan as a sideline reporter has been absolutely terrific. I think the studio coverage with Levy, Chelios, and Messier has been outstanding. I mean, remember, this is something ESPN hasn't had this now since 2004.
Messier and Chelios are the perfect people to hire.
I totally agree. And McDonough to me is somebody that actually could do almost every sport. And you know what? When the Rangers and the Lightning were playing, and you had the Sean McDonough voice crack when the Rangers had that 2-minute, that whole line, the young man's line, the kid line, leading into one of those goals, and you heard his voice crack. I mean, that was his best call the entire postseason. That was
the classic.
I don't know who else could have done that. I mean, the only person I think would have been better would have been obviously Sam Rosen, but I think
I beg to differ. Again, Doc Emmerich.
Well, Doc, yeah, but
No.
I thought that was fine. But I think but the whole point about this is I think it just shows you that even hockey now, while I don't think it'll overtake a lot of things, I think hockey's been going in the right direction. Baseball to me just continues to go in the wrong direction, and there's so many reasons why. And like you said, I think he's just tone deaf. I think Manfred is just so lost. It's unbelievable. So, you know, I just saw this, and now he's talking about this as well, and that this is supposedly trending in the right direction. And all this because he was taking in low A Southeast games. Good old Rob Manfred. What you've done to this sport, it's just unbelievable. Every week we come on this show, and it's like we're finding something else about baseball. And we should be sitting here, Hank and I should be sitting here in late June, excited that the Yankees are with their season, what the Mets are doing. It's unbelievable. You know, the Mets and the Yankees play each other in July and August. We should be looking forward to that. And yet,
still am, though, to be honest.
we still are. We are. But the problem is, and I've said this to people, when you watch their games and you try and get excited, there's something that happens that just brings you back to the lockout and brings you back to Manfred. That's the thing.
And I'm still probably going to go to at least one of them at Citi Field and probably one or both of them at Yankee Stadium, because I've been doing that probably every non-pandemic year for the last 5 years. It's been a lot of fun.
Yeah. You know what also was a lot of fun? This show.
What?
I had a lot to discuss today. This was a great. Yeah, this was a great show. So, Hank, thank you. And once again, thanks to Tom Albano for joining us to talk about Vince McMahon and the WWE and what will happen with that. And we will keep an eye on that. And, of course, folks, we thank you, as always, for joining us. We are presented by Knack. Make sure to go on to use the code that's on the bottom of the screen, and you get a Knack sling bag with your purchase there, and check out the whole list of products as well. So for Hank and Dictor, I am Johnny Montalbano. This has been Game On the Empty the Bench Podcast Network. We'll see you next week.